In your opinion, what would be the effect of this legislation? What are the benefits of having an independent counsel to monitor systemic risk, as well as an independent research office to support that mission?
Well, I think that this kind of relates to the previous question that was asked. I think we've all seen in Washington, D.C. that there can be a narrow interest with money at stake that can hire lobbyists to influence the process and have an untoward influence on the process. And those narrow insider interests can come to dominate processes like financial regulation. And I think the benefit of having some independence for these financial regulatory agencies is that they can make their own calls on the risk to the broader public, the potential risks to the broader financial system and the public, including risks to people who maybe are not the insiders here in Washington, D.C., who don't have the ability to hire lobbyists to monitor all these issues constantly. And these regulators need the independence to make that right call for the public interest, even if it could cost a regulated entity some money over the short term. And we saw in the lead up to the financial crisis the price we pay when that doesn't happen, including for entities like credit unions. 5 of the major corporate credit unions failed, and there was $30 billion in U.S. government bonds put out to support them. So I think FSOC independence is very important to make those calls.
Would you agree, Mr. Stanley, that FSOC, that is the Financial Stability Oversight Council, is an extremely important part of Dodd-Frank reforms? It's in Title I, and you have just alluded to the management of risk. And would you agree that this agency should be absolutely independent and not interfered with, again, by special interest or politics, that if we are to deal with the subprime meltdown and the crisis that was created, that we absolutely need to have FSOC being able to identify a risk and to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the FSOC is one of the absolutely central elements of Dodd-Frank, because when you look at so many of the entities that were involved in the financial crisis, they were not traditionally regulated commercial banks. They were investment banks who were following a capital markets model, who at that time were not regulated as commercial banks. They were insurance companies like AIG. And as our financial sector morphs and evolves, you know, free of the limits that were once put on it by Glass-Steagall, you get a lot of lending and financial activities taken over by non-banks, and it's crucial to be able to monitor that process and spot emerging risks. And regulators fell far, far behind in that process, and we can't let it happen again.
Thank you. And I'd also like to ask another question. H.R. 3340 would also require OFR to first solicit public comment before issuing a proposed report, rule, or regulation. Are you aware of any agency that is required to first seek public comment on the substance of a report they haven't yet published? What would be the effect of imposing this requirement on the OFR? Is there any harm in allowing the OFR to first publish a proposed report prior to seeking comment?
Now, I'm not familiar with any requirement that reports be somehow pre-cleared with interested parties before even just putting that report out to the public. I mean, a report is not a regulation. A report is something that's an attempt to inform the public and inform the public debate. And if people disagree with that report, they're perfectly free to contend with it after it's out there in the public and produce new information and data. And we've seen that happen with OFR. And I think to some degree, the idea that you're going to pre-clear these reports would impoverish the public debate. It's almost an attempt to allow that it could result in censorship of information before it reaches the public, and I think that's a problem.
I thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlewoman.